The folder sat in front of me like an uninvited guest, plain white without a single mark, yet it carried a weight that made my fingers hesitate. I looked around the table. Everyone was watching, though none would admit it. Their smiles remained plastered on their faces, but their eyes betrayed them, sharp, hungry, waiting. I opened it. At first, my mind refused to understand. My eyes scanned the lines, but they blurred, as if my body itself was trying to protect me from the truth. Then the words sank in. Prenuptial agreement. Clause after clause stretched across the page, each one colder than the last. If I left, I would walk away with nothing. If I stayed, everything I earned became theirs. If I stumbled, if I failed, I would pay the price alone. Every sentence was written not in ink, but in judgment. Not in law, but in disdain. I felt the heat rising in my face. My hands trembled, the paper rattling softly, a sound that seemed deafening in the silence. This wasn't love. This was a transaction. I looked up. Ramona's smile widened, polished and perfect. Standard procedure, dear, nothing personal. But everything about it was personal. I searched for Braden's eyes, desperate for something, defense, apology, anything. But he didn't look at me. His gaze was fixed on his wine glass, his jaw tense. And then I saw it. At the bottom of the page, neat and clear, his signature. The room tilted, my throat closed. My heart slammed against my ribs as though trying to escape. He had known. He had agreed. He had signed before I had even touched the paper. My breath came shallow. The laughter, the candlelight, the polished silver, all of it blurred into nothing. I forced a smile, though it tasted of ashes. I raised my glass, the crystal trembling between my fingers. Of course, I whispered, my voice barely steady. Nothing personal. But inside, something cracked. Not the kind of crack that heals with time, the kind that splits a life in two, before and after. And I knew as I sipped the champagne that burned like fire that nothing would ever be the same again. The paper shook in my hands, though the room itself was still. I wanted to believe I had misread, that the ink blurred because of the candlelight, or my own fear, or some cruel trick of the eye. But the signature was there, bold, certain, final. Braden's name. I lifted my gaze to him, hoping, pleading for something, an explanation, a denial. Even a lie would have been kinder than this suffocating silence. But he didn't look at me. He traced the rim of his glass with his finger, round and round, as though the reflection in the wine was more interesting than the woman beside him. His jaw was clenched tight, his shoulders stiff, but his eyes refused mine. And that refusal was worse than the contract. I had imagined betrayal before, in stories, in movies, in whispered gossip. I thought it would come with raised voices, cruel words, slammed doors. But this was betrayal in its purest form, silence. The kind of silence that says you are not worth defending. Ramona filled the void, her voice smooth as velvet, slicing through the tension. Don't be dramatic, darling. It's just a formality. We protect what is ours. Ours. The word burned. Did I not belong to that ours? Or was I only ever a guest, allowed to stay as long as I agreed to the rules carved by her hand? Around the table, the others chuckled politely, as though this humiliation was entertainment. Forks clinked against plates again. Conversations resumed. False, brittle, carrying on as if nothing had happened. But something had happened, something no laughter could bury. I lowered my gaze to my plate, my throat thick with unshed tears. I forced myself to breathe, to hold my chin high, to swallow the scream clawing its way up my chest. I could survive the contract. I could survive their disdain. But his silence? That silence told me I was already alone. And in that moment, a truth cut deeper than any clause on the page. The man I loved had chosen not to choose me. I escaped as soon as I could. The moment dessert was served with its perfect swirl of cream and berries arranged like jewels, I excused myself. My voice was steady, polite. My hands, hidden under the table, trembled so violently I thought the crystal glass might slip and shatter. The hallway was silent as I walked, my heels clicking against the marble like a heartbeat out of rhythm. I found the bathroom, closed the door, and locked it. And then I collapsed. My back slid against the door until I was sitting on the cold tile floor, the folder clutched against my chest as though it were a weapon pressed into my ribs. My breath came in shallow gasps, my body shaking as though it could not contain the storm inside. Finally, I forced myself to rise. The mirror above the sink glared down at me, harsh and merciless under the golden light. And there I was. My face was pale, almost ghostly. My lipstick smudged at the corners. My eyes, oh, my eyes. They didn't look like mine. They were red, glassy, hollow, as though someone had reached inside and stolen their fire. I pressed my palms against the porcelain sink, leaning close to the glass. "Who are you?" I whispered. The woman in the mirror didn't answer. She just stared back, broken, unrecognizable. Tears spilled over, hot and unstoppable. They traced down my cheeks, staining the dress I had chosen so carefully. The dress I thought I would wear with pride, in the house of the man I loved. I covered my mouth with trembling fingers to muffle the sobs, but they forced their way out anyway. They tore through my chest, raw and violent, the kind of sobs that leave you gasping for air. For the first time that night, I allowed myself to break. No audience, no mask, no forced smile, just me. Shattered and alone, in a gilded bathroom that smelled faintly of roses and bleach. The folder slipped from my hands, papers scattering across the floor like fallen leaves. I sank to my knees, gathering them clumsily, desperate to put them back together, as if order on the page could restore order to my life. But as I reached for the last page, my eyes froze. There it was again, his signature, clear, confident, unhesitating. And in that small black line, I saw the truth more clearly than any reflection in the mirror. Braden had already chosen, and it wasn't me. The pages lay scattered across the cold tile, white against white, but to me they glowed like fire. I reached for them with trembling hands, stacking them one by one, though each sheet felt heavier than stone. I forced myself to read. Clause after clause stretched across the paper, written in the language of wealth, of power, of fear. If I left, I would leave with nothing. If I stayed, everything I earned would no longer be mine. If I faltered, even once, I would be punished. There was no space for love in those lines, no space for trust or tenderness or the promises whispered under moonlight. I swallowed hard, my tears blurring the words, but I could not look away. And then I saw it again, his name, not just on the last page, but on every page. His initials neatly written in the corners, as though he had read, considered, and approved each demand. Line after line, clause after clause, Braden had nodded his agreement. It was not a moment of weakness. It was not a mistake. It was a choice. My breath caught, a sob clawing its way up my throat. I pressed my fist to my mouth, shaking my head, whispering, "No, no," as though denial could rewrite the ink. But the ink was permanent, and so was the truth. Memories flashed, his hand in mine on late-night walks, the way he whispered I was his future, his laughter when I tripped over my own words. Each memory twisted now, poisoned by the realization that while I believed in us, he had already signed me away. I lifted one page, my tears staining the corner. The words blurred, but one sentence cut through, sharp and merciless. Party B agrees to surrender all independent assets upon marriage. Party B. That was me. Not Lev, not the woman he said he loved. Just Party B, a placeholder, an item on a ledger. I pressed the paper to my chest, my sobs shaking through me until the edges crumpled. It wasn't only the contract that broke me, it was what it revealed. The man I loved hadn't simply betrayed me with silence. He had conspired in it. He had been theirs all along. The papers slid from my hands again, scattering across the floor like feathers torn from a broken bird. I couldn't pick them up anymore. I didn't have the strength. Instead, I leaned back against the wall, my knees drawn tight to my chest. The tiles were cold through the fabric of my dress, grounding me, reminding me that this wasn't a nightmare I could wake from. This was real. And in that cold silence, another voice rose, not from the room, from my memory. It was my mother. "Lev," she used to say, her hands warm against my hair as she braided it, "don't ever mistake comfort for love. Comfort can be given. Love must be chosen every single day." Her words echoed, each syllable threading itself through the hollow places in my chest. Back then, I didn't understand. I was too young, too eager to believe that love was forever if you just wanted it badly enough. I thought her warnings were fear, born from her own broken heart. But now I understood. Braden hadn't chosen me. Not once. Not that night when he signed, not tonight when he stayed silent. I closed my eyes and the memory deepened. I was 12 again, sitting at the kitchen table while rain battered the windows. My mother, tired but strong, placed a cup of cocoa in front of me. She leaned close and whispered, "One day, someone will try to make you small. They'll smile while they do it and the world will applaud. But you must never let them. Do you hear me, Lev? You must never let them." Tears spilled freely now, hot and relentless. My chest ached as I whispered back into the empty bathroom, "I hear you, Mama. I hear you now." The mirror across the room caught my reflection, broken, tear-streaked, but alive. And for the first time that night, I realized something terrifying and beautiful. The pain I felt wasn't weakness, it was clarity. My mother's voice was right. Love isn't silent. Love doesn't sign contracts in the dark. Love doesn't turn you into Party B. Love protects. Love fights. Love chooses. And in that golden bathroom, with the scent of roses clinging to the air and my mother's memory wrapping itself around me, I swore to myself I would not be small, not for Ramona, not for Braden, not for anyone. My hands still shook as I gathered the papers once more. Not to read them. No, I had read enough, but to transform them, to take the words meant to bind me and make them into something else. I smoothed one page against the floor, the ink staring back at me like chains, and then, slowly, deliberately, I began to fold. It was something my mother had taught me when I was a child, restless during long nights when the world felt too heavy. "Fold the pain," she'd whisper. "Make it into something small, something you can carry without breaking." So I folded, a crease down the middle, a triangle at the corner, a wing, then another. Tears blurred my vision, soaking into the paper, making it soft and fragile beneath my fingers. Still, I kept folding, each movement a defiance, each line a refusal to let their words be the final truth. At last, the shape emerged, a bird, crooked, imperfect, but undeniably free. I held it in my hands, trembling. "Party B," I whispered, my voice raw, broken. "No, my name is Lev." The bird didn't answer, of course, but in its fragile wings I saw something no contract could take from me. Choice. I pressed the bird to my chest, closing my eyes as sobs shook through me. These were not the helpless sobs from before. These were cleansing, purging, a storm that stripped me bare but left behind something fierce, something alive. I thought of Braden's silence, of Ramona's smile, of the cold signatures marching across every page, and then I thought of my mother's voice. "Never let them make you small." I opened my eyes. The mirror caught me again, my face swollen and streaked with tears. But this time I saw more than a broken woman. I saw someone still standing. The bird rested in my palm, fragile yet unyielding. And in that moment I made a vow, not to them, not even to Braden, but to myself. I would not be defined by their ink. I would not be silenced by their contracts. I would not be owned. They thought they had trapped me, but all they had done was teach me how to fly. When I finally returned to the dining room, the laughter had grown louder, too loud. It was the kind of laughter people use to patch cracks in the walls, brittle and hollow. I walked back to my seat, my chin high, the paper bird hidden in the folds of my dress. My eyes burned, but I would not let them see. Not yet. The moment I sat down, I felt it. The weight of their gazes, Ramona's, sharp as glass. The others, sly and darting, pretending not to watch while watching everything. Braden didn't look up. He hadn't moved an inch. His glass was still in his hand, half full, untouched. The silverware clinked, the candles flickered. Someone told a joke and the table erupted in rehearsed delight. But beneath it all, there was a tension, a shift. They thought I had broken in that bathroom. They thought I had returned smaller, weaker, already bent to their will. I kept my smile steady, though it felt carved from stone. I picked up my fork, touched the food, though my stomach churned too violently to swallow, and then I saw her. Across the table, Nerida. She was younger than the rest, softer somehow, her hair tumbling freely around her shoulders, while the others wore theirs in polished perfection. Her eyes caught mine for just a moment, and in them I saw something I hadn't seen all night. Pity. No, more than pity. Recognition. She looked away quickly, as if afraid someone might notice, but the glance was enough. A thread of warmth in the ice. A whisper that I was not entirely alone in this room of predators. I sat taller, my breath deepening. The paper bird pressed lightly against my side, fragile yet defiant. They thought they knew me. They thought they had caged me. But as I lifted my glass, meeting Ramona's cold eyes with my own, I realized something vital. I was still here, and I was not done yet. Dinner dragged on, each course arriving like another test of endurance. I moved food around my plate, smiling when expected, nodding when someone addressed me, though I heard nothing of their words. My ears rang with the echo of my mother's voice, with the scratch of Braden's signature still burning in my mind. And then, quietly, it happened. A napkin slipped to the floor across from me. Nerida bent to pick it up, her movements graceful, unhurried. But when she straightened, her eyes met mine again. Longer this time. Steady. In her gaze was something I hadn't seen in anyone else at that table. Not mockery, not cold calculation. Understanding. As she folded the napkin back onto her lap, her fingers moved almost imperceptibly, a small tilt of her head. The faintest shake. I see you. I know. It was a gesture so subtle the others missed it, but to me it was deafening. For the first time that night, I felt the ice around me crack, just slightly. I lowered my eyes quickly, but not before offering the smallest of nods. A breath. Nothing more. Yet in that breath, an entire conversation passed between us. You are not invisible. You are not alone. The warmth of that silent exchange settled into me, fragile, but real. Like a candle lit in the dark, it didn't banish the shadows, but it reminded me they could be fought. The table roared again with laughter at some joke I hadn't caught. Ramona's rings glittered as she lifted her glass. Braden's silence hung heavy beside me, but Nerida's eyes lingered, just enough to say, I'm here, and that, I realized, could be enough. By the time the plates were cleared and the wine had been poured again, my cheeks ached from the performance of smiling. The room was warm with candlelight, heavy with perfume and power. I excused myself for a moment, rising with a steady hand. To my surprise, Nerida rose too. I'll walk with you, she said lightly, her voice carrying the tone of casual courtesy. No one questioned it. Why would they? Two women stepping away from the table was no threat. But the moment we crossed the threshold of the hallway, the air shifted. The laughter behind us dulled, fading into the distance. My chest loosened just slightly, as though I had taken off a mask. Narita's steps slowed until we walked side by side. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, barely above a whisper, "I'm sorry." 2 words. That was all. But they struck deeper than anything else I had heard that night. I turned to her, my throat tight. Her face was calm, careful, but her eyes were fierce, burning with a fire she dared not show in the dining room. "They do this to everyone," she continued softly. "You're not the first. You won't be the last." I wanted to speak, to ask 1,000 questions, but my voice wouldn't come. My lips parted, only a breath escaping. Her gaze softened. "Be careful, Lev. They smile while they set the trap. And once you're caught—" She shook her head, the words dying in her throat. The hallway stretched around us, lined with portraits of ancestors staring down in oil and guilt, their painted eyes watching. The house itself seemed to listen, so I did what I could. I nodded. Once. A vow in silence. Narita's hand brushed mine for the briefest moment, too quick for anyone to notice, but long enough for me to feel the warmth of another human being against my cold skin. And then, just as swiftly, she pulled away, her posture straightening as she re-entered the dining room. By the time anyone saw her, she was once again the dutiful daughter, smiling, graceful, untouchable. I followed, my heart heavier and lighter, all at once. Heavier with the truth, lighter with the knowledge that somewhere in this gilded cage a crack had formed, and through that crack light had entered. When I returned to the table, something in the air had shifted. It wasn't obvious. The laughter still rang out, the crystal still glittered, the servers still moved with practiced elegance. But beneath it, I felt it. The tightening, the precision. It was no longer a dinner. It was a chessboard. Ramona moved first, her words smooth, deliberate. "Lev, dear, I trust everything is in order now. You understand how important it is to protect the family." Her tone was light, but her eyes were sharp, like a queen sliding across the board, cutting off any escape. I smiled faintly, though inside my chest burned. "Of course," I said. "I understand." A murmur of approval swept the table, subtle but present. A bishop taking its place. Then another voice, an uncle, perhaps, or a cousin. I could hardly tell any more. He leaned forward, smiling too wide. "Marriage is about unity, isn't it? About knowing one's role. Some people forget that." Another piece moved. A knight, subtle, bending the path. Every comment was dressed in courtesy, but each carried the same message: know your place. I sipped from my glass, my lips trembling against the rim. I wanted to shout, to demand answers, but instinct told me silence was safer. For now. Across the table, Narita lowered her gaze, her fork tracing idle patterns on her plate. She said nothing, but I knew she saw it too. The game unfolding, the lines being drawn. And Braden sat still, his silence louder than the clinking of all the silver. He hadn't spoken since the folder touched the table. He hadn't looked at me since. A rook refusing to move, yet guarding the queen. The meal continued, but I tasted none of it. My mind whirled, my pulse thundering in my ears. Each laugh, each carefully chosen word, each sidelong glance was another reminder. I was not a guest at their table. I was the board they played upon, and every move brought me closer to checkmate. The courses dwindled, the candles burning lower. The performance of hospitality was nearly complete, yet the tension had only sharpened. I could feel it coiling tighter, waiting for the final strike. Ramona placed her napkin delicately on the table, her rings catching the light like tiny blades. She leaned forward slightly, her gaze locking on mine. "Lev," she said, her voice velvet smooth, I want you to understand something clearly." The table hushed. Even the clink of silver ceased, as though the entire room bowed to her words. "In this family there is no room for weakness, no room for mistakes. What we have built, we guard fiercely. Anyone who enters must prove their worth. Do you understand?" Her smile remained, but it was the kind of smile that belongs to a predator just before the strike. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. My hands itched to reach for the paper bird hidden in my dress, but I kept them steady in my lap. "Yes," I whispered. But Ramona wasn't finished. Her eyes glinted as she added, softly but with razor precision, "And should anyone forget their place, should anyone imagine themselves more than what they were brought here to be—" She paused, lifting her glass. "They will find themselves discarded, quickly, quietly, without mercy." She sipped her wine and the table relaxed again, conversation bubbling up as if nothing had been said. But the words hung in the air, heavy and unshakable, like a sentence already passed. My chest ached with the weight of it. It wasn't just a warning, it was a promise. Across the table, Nerida's eyes flickered toward me, quick, fleeting but full of urgency. Her silent plea was clear. "Be careful." I lowered my gaze, forcing another smile, though inside I felt my mother's words echoing louder than ever. "Don't ever let them make you small." Ramona thought she had cornered me. She thought her words had caged me like a bird, but I still held the paper bird close to my heart, and in that fragile defiance, I knew this was not the end. The clatter of forks, the hum of conversation, the polite laughter, it all blurred into a distant echo. Inside me, silence roared. Ramona's warning still pulsed in the air, every syllable heavy with certainty. Around her, the others resumed their roles effortlessly, as though the Queen's decree had been nothing more than a toast. But I knew better. This wasn't a family dinner. It was a ritual, a performance staged not for celebration, but for domination, and I was the stage. Every smile directed at me, every word laced with courtesy, every toast raised in my honor. It was all part of a design, a test, a message. I had walked into this house believing I was joining a family, but now I saw the truth. I was a piece on their board. Ramona the queen, Braden the silent rook at her side, the uncles and cousins pawns dressed in silk, Nerita the lone piece out of place, fragile, yet still resisting. And me? I wasn't even a player. I was the game itself. The contract, the silence, the warning, every move had been calculated long before I sat at this table. My presence was not a blessing to them. It was a challenge to be broken, reshaped, controlled. The realization settled heavy in my bones, cold as the marble beneath my feet. For a moment, despair threatened to swallow me whole. What hope did one woman have against a family this powerful, this merciless? But then my hand brushed against the fold of my dress, where the paper bird rested, fragile, small, imperfect, and yet undeniably mine. I straightened my spine, forcing my breath steady. If they wanted me to be a piece, then they had underestimated me. Because even pawns can reach the other side of the board. Even pawns can become queens. I raised my glass once more, smiling with a grace I did not feel. The candlelight flickered in the crystal, and for the first time that night, I let them see nothing but composure. They thought I was broken. They thought I was trapped. But in that moment, I made a silent vow. This game wasn't over, and I would not lose. When the last toast was raised and the final polite laugh faded, I was shown to a guest room at the end of the hall. The door closed behind me with a soft click, but to me it sounded like a lock. The room was beautiful, too beautiful. Heavy drapes of velvet hung over the windows, muting the night outside. A bed carved from dark mahogany stood in the center, its white linens crisp and cold. On the dresser, a vase of roses sat in perfect bloom, their fragrance sweet but suffocating. It should have felt like luxury. Instead, it felt like a cage dressed in silk. I slipped off my shoes and sat on the edge of the bed, my hands clasped so tightly they ached. The paper bird was still with me, folded carefully inside my dress pocket. I pulled it out now, holding it in my palm. Its wings were bent, fragile, but it was mine. And yet, as I stared at it, doubt clawed at me. What chance did I really have? Against Ramona, against the family, against the silence of the man I loved? The walls seemed to lean closer, pressing in on me, listening. My breath came shallow, uneven. I wanted to scream, to cry, to tear the roses from their vase and scatter them across the floor. Instead, I just sat there, trembling, the weight of everything crushing down. I thought of Braden, his face turned away, his silence louder than any betrayal. Was he ashamed? Afraid? Or had he chosen them so completely that I no longer existed at all? A part of me wanted to believe he was trapped, just as I was, that somewhere behind those cold eyes, the man who once whispered promises to me was still alive. But another part, the deeper, harsher part, whispered the truth I feared most. He had never been mine. The roses on the dresser blurred through my tears. I pressed the paper bird to my chest, clutching it as though it could keep me from breaking apart completely. That night, in the silence of the guest room, I was torn in two, half broken by despair, half clinging to the fragile thread of defiance that still lived inside me. And for the first time, I wondered, was survival the same as surrender? 15. I don't know how long I sat there staring at the roses until their edges blurred. Time felt heavy, unmeasured, pressing down on me like the velvet curtains. Then, 3 soft knocks on the door. My chest tightened. My first thought was Ramona, come to finish what she started. But when the door opened, it was Braden. He stood there in the dim hallway light, his face half-shadowed, his tie loosened, his shoulders heavy. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us stretched, raw and unbearable. Finally, I whispered, "Why?" It was all I could manage, a single word carrying every question, every wound, every betrayal. His lips parted, but no sound came. He stepped inside, closing the door gently behind him. His eyes flickered to the paper bird in my hands, then back to my face. He began, his voice rough, unfinished. He looked away as though the weight of my gaze was too much. "It's complicated." Complicated. The word cut through me like glass. I laughed, quiet, bitter, broken. "Complicated? That's all you have to say?" He flinched, just slightly, but he didn't move closer. He stayed near the door as if ready to retreat at any moment. "I didn't want this," he murmured, his hands curled into fists at his sides. "I didn't what?" My voice trembled, my anger fighting with despair. Didn't sign? Didn't stay silent tonight? Didn't let them strip me down in front of everyone? He looked at me then, really looked, and for a fleeting second I thought I saw something, guilt maybe, or sorrow. A man trapped, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. His jaw tightened and his silence returned like a wall. I shook my head, tears spilling again. You could have said one word, Braden, just one, and instead you gave them everything. He closed his eyes. His breath shuddered out of him, but still no answer came. The silence between us became the answer. When he finally opened the door to leave, he paused, his back to me. "I'm sorry," he said softly. Then he was gone. The room felt colder than before. The roses, the velvet, the mahogany, all of it suffocated me. I sank back onto the bed, the paper bird crumpling in my fist, and in that moment, I realized something terrible. His silence wasn't weakness. It was a choice. 16. The door had barely closed when the silence came crashing back. I sat frozen on the edge of the bed, Braden's words, "It's complicated, I'm sorry," echoing in my skull like a hollow refrain. Anger burned hot, but beneath it, something colder stirred. confusion, doubt. If he had truly chosen them, why had his eyes flickered that way? Why did his voice catch, as though the words were fighting him from the inside? I pressed the paper bird to my lips, breathing against its fragile wings. My mind raced back to the dinner table, to the way Braden sat so still, a statue in silk. He hadn't laughed with the others. He hadn't gloated like Ramona. He hadn't even looked at me until tonight. And when he did, it wasn't triumph I saw. It was fear. Suddenly, the pieces shifted, like a pattern hidden in plain sight. Braden wasn't the king of this board. He wasn't even the player. He was a rook. Tall, strong, but bound to move only in straight lines, guarding the queen, Ramona's queen, the contract, the silence, the warning. None of it had been his idea. He was too careful, too quiet, too trapped. A memory surfaced unbidden. The way his hand would tense whenever Ramona entered the room, the way his smile dimmed in her presence. I used to think it was respect. Now I saw it differently. It was obedience. I leaned back against the headboard, the velvet pressing against me, my breath trembling out. The betrayal still cut deep. It always would, but a new understanding seeped into the wound. Braden had signed. Yes, he had betrayed me with silence. Yes, but maybe, just maybe, it wasn't love he lacked. It was freedom. I closed my eyes, whispering into the empty room. "You're not the enemy, are you?" The paper bird rested in my palm, bent but unbroken, and as I held it, one truth settled heavy in my chest. Braden was a piece in their game, and if I was going to survive this, I would have to play mine better. That night, long after Braden left and the house sank into silence, I couldn't sleep. I lay on the bed staring at the ceiling carved with patterns of vines and roses, but all I could see was my own reflection in the dark. My heart beat too loudly, my breath caught in my throat, and then, slowly, memories began to surface. I was no longer in the gilded guest room. I was a little girl again, bare feet on a cold wooden floor, clutching a cracked doll missing one eye. The house smelled of damp, the kind of damp that seeps into your bones and never lets go. My mother's hands were always tired, always trembling, yet every night, no matter how weary she was, she would sit beside me on my narrow bed and braid my hair. Her voice was soft, almost a lullaby. "Lev, remember, love isn't something you beg for. Love must meet you halfway." But even as she said it, I saw the emptiness in her eyes, the loneliness, the years of being unseen. I learned early what it felt like to be small, to be invisible, to want someone to choose you and find instead only silence. Maybe that was why Braden's hand on mine had felt like salvation once, why his promises had seemed like miracles, because somewhere deep inside, the child I once was still believed love could heal everything. And maybe that was why tonight hurt so much, because it wasn't just Braden who failed me. It was every echo of my past, every whispered promise that love could save me, breaking all over again. I turned onto my side, clutching the paper bird to my chest. My tears dampened its wings, warping the folds, but I held on anyway. The little girl inside me was crying, but the woman I had become, she was listening. For the first time, I realized something my mother hadn't lived long enough to teach me. Love could be a lifeline, but it could also be a chain. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop waiting to be chosen. The room was too quiet. So quiet I could hear the tick of the old clock on the dresser, each second dragging like a chain across my chest. I lit the small lamp beside the bed, its glow soft and golden, and pulled a leather-bound notebook from my bag. It was the only thing truly mine in this place. Pages filled with fragments of myself, scribbled thoughts, little sketches, half-finished letters I never sent. Tonight I opened to a blank page. The pen trembled in my hand as I wrote the first words. I don't know who I am to them anymore. The ink bled slightly into the paper, my hand heavy, uneven. But once I began, the words poured out like a storm breaking. They want me small. They want me silent. They want me obedient. I feel like I'm drowning in their rules, their contracts, their laughter that doesn't reach their eyes. I thought Braden would be my anchor, but he is drifting too, maybe farther than I can reach. Tears blurred the page, the ink smudging. I pressed on, my hand aching but relentless. I remember being a little girl, waiting for love to choose me. I thought it had this time. I thought I was finally seen. But tonight proved something I didn't want to know. Love can betray as deeply as it can heal. I stopped, staring at the mess of black and water on the page. My chest tightened, but then slowly, my hand began to move again. If they want to break me, they'll have to do more than sign papers and smile with knives behind their teeth. I am not just the sum of their contracts. I am not a pawn they can discard. If Braden is trapped, I can pity him. But I will not join him, not in silence, not in surrender. My pen scratched harder, faster. The words no longer wavered. They carved themselves into the paper. I don't know how yet. I don't know when. But I will find a way to stand. For the girl I was. For the woman I am. For the pieces of me they cannot own. When I finally put the pen down, my hands were shaking, my cheeks wet, but something inside me had shifted. The notebook lay open on the bed, the paper bird resting on top of it, ink and fold, word and wing, both fragile, both mine. The night stretched long and sleepless, but for the first time, I welcomed it. Because even in the darkness, I had found a flicker of light. 19. The first hint of dawn pressed against the curtains, a faint gray light creeping into the room. I hadn't slept at all. My eyes were swollen, my throat raw, but my mind felt sharper than it had in weeks. I sat at the desk, the notebook open before me, last night's words staring back like a mirror I couldn't look away from. Beside it, the paper bird lay crumpled, its wings bent from the night I clutched it too tightly. For a long time, I simply stared at them both, fragile things, easy to tear, easy to destroy, and yet still here, just like me. I rose and crossed to the window, pulling the heavy curtains aside. Morning spilled in, pale and cold, touching the roses on the dresser, the polished floor, my tired face in the glass. From this window, I could see the garden below, perfectly pruned, symmetrical. Not a leaf out of place. Beauty by control. Order through force. It reminded me of Ramona, and in that moment I understood something clearly. If I allowed them, they would prune me the same way. Shape me. Silence me. Until nothing of me remained but what they demanded. I pressed my palm flat against the glass, my reflection staring back at me. My voice came out hoarse but steady. No. The word was small, but it filled the room. No to silence. No to being a pawn. No to surrender. I didn't know what steps I would take yet, or how I would survive their game, but I knew this. They would not have all of me. Not my will. Not my soul. I returned to the desk, carefully unfolding the crumpled paper bird. Its creases were deeper now, its wings uneven, but when I set it upright, it still stood. Wounded, imperfect, but standing. Like me. I placed it on the notebook, closed the cover, and whispered to myself, I will not break. The house stirred awake beyond the door. Footsteps in the hall, voices rising for the day ahead. Soon the game would begin again, but this time, I would not step onto the board unknowing. This time, I would play. That night, long after Braden left and the house sank into silence, I couldn't sleep. I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling carved with patterns of vines and roses, but all I could see was my own reflection in the dark. My heart beat too loudly, my breath caught in my throat, and then, slowly, memories began to surface. I was no longer in the gilded guest room. I was a little girl again, bare feet on a cold wooden floor, clutching a cracked doll, missing one eye. The house smelled of damp, the kind of damp that seeps into your bones and never lets go. My mother's hands were always tired, always trembling. Yet every night, no matter how weary she was, she would sit beside me on my narrow bed and braid my hair. Her voice was soft, almost a lullaby. Lev, remember, love isn't something you beg for. Love must meet you halfway. But even as she said it, I saw the emptiness in her eyes, the loneliness, the years of being unseen. I learned early what it felt like to be small, to be invisible, to want someone to choose you and find instead only silence. Maybe that was why Braden's hand on mine had felt like salvation once, why his promises had seemed like miracles, because somewhere deep inside, the child I once was still believed love could heal everything. And maybe that was why tonight hurt so much, because it wasn't just Braden who failed me. It was every echo of my past, every whispered promise that love could save me, breaking all over again. I turned onto my side, clutching the paper bird to my chest. My tears dampened its wings, warping the folds, but I held on anyway. The little girl inside me was crying, but the woman I had become, she was listening. For the first time, I realized something my mother hadn't lived long enough to teach me. Love could be a lifeline, but it could also be a chain. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop waiting to be chosen. The room was too quiet. So quiet I could hear the tick of the old clock on the dresser, each second dragging like a chain across my chest. I lit the small lamp beside the bed, its glow soft and golden, and pulled a leather-bound notebook from my bag. It was the only thing truly mine in this place. Pages filled with fragments of myself, scribbled thoughts, little sketches, half-finished letters I never sent. Tonight I opened to a blank page. The pen trembled in my hand as I wrote the first words. I don't know who I am to them anymore. The ink bled slightly into the paper, my hand heavy, uneven. But once I began, the words poured out like a storm breaking. They want me small. They want me silent. They want me obedient. I feel like I'm drowning in their rules, their contracts, their laughter that doesn't reach their eyes. I thought Braden would be my anchor. But he is drifting too, maybe farther than I can reach. Tears blurred the page, the ink smudging. I pressed on, my hand aching but relentless. I remember being a little girl, waiting for love to choose me. I thought it had, this time. I thought I was finally seen. But tonight proved something I didn't want to know. Love can betray as deeply as it can heal. I stopped staring at the mess of black and water on the page. My chest tightened, but then, slowly, my hand began to move again. If they want to break me, they'll have to do more than sign papers and smile with knives behind their teeth. I am not just the sum of their contracts. I am not a pawn they can discard. If Braden is trapped, I can pity him, but I will not join him, not in silence, not in surrender. My pen scratched harder, faster. The words no longer wavered. They carved themselves into the paper. I don't know how yet. I don't know when. But I will find a way to stand. For the girl I was. For the woman I am. For the pieces of me they cannot own. When I finally put the pen down, my hands were shaking, my cheeks wet, but something inside me had shifted. The notebook lay open on the bed, the paper bird resting on top of it, ink and fold, word and wing, both fragile, both mine. The night stretched long and sleepless, but for the first time, I welcomed it. Because even in the darkness, I had found a flicker of light. The first hint of dawn pressed against the curtains, a faint gray light creeping into the room. I hadn't slept at all. My eyes were swollen, my throat raw, but my mind felt sharper than it had in weeks. I sat at the desk, the notebook open before me, last night's words staring back like a mirror I couldn't look away from. Beside it, the paper bird lay crumpled, its wings bent from the night I clutched it too tightly. For a long time, I simply stared at them both, fragile things, easy to tear, easy to destroy, and yet still here, just like me. I rose and crossed to the window, pulling the heavy curtains aside. Morning spilled in, pale and cold, touching the roses on the dresser, the polished floor, my tired face in the glass. From this window, I could see the garden below, perfectly pruned, symmetrical, not a leaf out of place. Beauty by control, order through force. It reminded me of Ramona, and in that moment, I understood something clearly. If I allowed them, they would prune me the same way, shape me, silence me, until nothing of me remained but what they demanded. I pressed my palm flat against the glass, my reflection staring back at me. My voice came out hoarse but steady. No. The word was small, but it filled the room. No to silence. No to being a pawn. No to surrender. I didn't know what steps I would take yet, or how I would survive their game, but I knew this. They would not have all of me, not my will, not my soul. I returned to the desk, carefully unfolding the crumpled paper bird. Its creases were deeper now, its wings uneven, but when I set it upright, it still stood, wounded, imperfect, but standing, like me. I placed it on the notebook, closed the cover, and whispered to myself, I will not break. The house stirred awake beyond the door, footsteps in the hall, voices rising for the day ahead. Soon the game would begin again. But this time, I would not step onto the board unknowing. This time, I would play. Morning light spilled through the tall windows, painting the dining room in pale gold. The same room as last night, yet stripped of its glitter. The chandeliers were dim now, their brilliance replaced by sunlight that revealed every flaw in the polished silver and every shadow in the corners. The family gathered again, as if the previous evening had been nothing but a dream. The table was set for breakfast, china plates stacked neatly, steam rising from fresh bread, bowls of fruit arranged in perfect symmetry. But to me, it felt less like breakfast and more like another performance. I sat quietly, my hands folded on my lap, the paper bird hidden once again in my dress. My eyes roamed the faces around me, Ramona at the head, serene as ever, her poise unshaken. The uncles murmuring about business, the cousins laughing too loudly about trivial things. Braden sat across from me, his face pale in the morning light. He buttered a piece of toast without looking up, every movement mechanical, as though even breakfast had rules he dared not break. No one mentioned the night before, not the contract, not the warning, not the silence that had cut me open. It was as if those words had been erased, as if the family had agreed to bury them under porcelain and marmalade. But the weight of them lingered. Every glance that flickered toward me was a reminder. Every too polite question, "Did you sleep well, Lev?" was a test, watching for cracks in my mask, and I played my part. I smiled faintly, murmured that I had slept fine, though my eyes burned from the sleepless night. Inside, I counted each second, each breath, waiting for the moment when the game beneath their courtesy would show itself again. Because I knew now, nothing in this house was ever casual. Every word was chosen, every gesture rehearsed, and sure enough, it came. Ramona set down her teacup with a delicate clink. Her gaze swept the table, warm enough to fool anyone who hadn't heard the venom in her voice last night. "Family," she said, "is built on loyalty, and loyalty," her eyes settled on me, lingering, "must be proven every day." The room stilled, the words hanging in the air like a blade poised to fall. I felt every pair of eyes turn toward me, waiting. Another move on the board. Ramona's words still floated in the air. Loyalty must be proven every day. Her gaze did not waver from me. I forced myself to meet her eyes, though every instinct screamed to look away. Her smile was gracious, almost tender, but I knew better now. Beneath it was steel. She folded her hands on the table. "Tell me, Lev," she said smoothly, "where does your loyalty lie? With your own past, or with us, with this family?" The chatter around the table died. Knives paused mid-slice, spoons hovered over bowls. The silence was absolute. My throat tightened. I could feel Braden's eyes on me, though he didn't lift his head. He kept staring at his untouched toast, jaw clenched. Ramona tilted her head, her tone still honey-sweet. "It's a simple question, dear, but important. We must all be certain of our foundation. After all, families cannot survive cracks." A ripple of agreement murmured through the table. Uncles nodded, cousins smirked. I felt their stares pressing into me, each one daring me to falter. My hands shook under the table, hidden in my lap. I clenched them into fists, nails digging crescents into my palms. What could I say? That my loyalty was to Braden, the man who had betrayed me in silence, that it was to myself, the woman they already saw as weak? Ramona leaned closer, her voice dropping to a velvet whisper that everyone could still hear. "Do you stand with us, Lev, or do you stand alone?" The words struck like a lash. I wanted to shout, to hurl the china plate across the table, to scream that I was not theirs to own, but the weight of their eyes held me down, suffocating. Braden shifted slightly in his chair. For one fleeting moment, I thought he would speak, defend me, say something, anything, but he didn't. He only pressed his lips tighter, his silence sealing my isolation. The blood roared in my ears, my vision blurred. I felt smaller with every heartbeat crushed under their scrutiny. In that moment, I understood. This was not a question. It was a demand, a command disguised as choice, and whichever way I answered, I would lose. The room waited, breathless. I swallowed hard, forcing my trembling voice into the silence. My loyalty, my words cracked, fragile as glass, doesn't belong to anyone who tries to break me. Gasps rippled around the table. A cousin dropped his spoon with a clatter. Ramona's smile froze. Her eyes glinted, sharp as a blade unsheathed. For the first time, I had defied her openly, and I knew there would be a price. The room seemed to freeze after my words. Every eye turned to me, wide with shock, disbelief, even amusement. Ramona's smile lingered, but it was no longer warm. It was tight, brittle, like porcelain about to crack. "My dear," she said softly, "you don't quite understand the weight of what you've just spoken." I rose slowly from my chair. The scrape of wood against marble rang through the silence, louder than thunder. My hands trembled at my sides, but I forced them still. For once, I wasn't trying to hide my shaking. Let them see. Let them witness the storm inside me. I met Ramona's eyes. My voice was quiet but steady, every syllable chosen, carved from the resolve that had been forged in sleepless nights and broken promises. "I understand perfectly," I said, "and I won't apologize for it. You may have power, you may have control, but loyalty isn't something you can demand with contracts or threats. It's earned. And none of this—" I swept my gaze across the glittering table, the frozen faces, Braden's bowed head, "has earned mine." A silence heavier than stone descended. The air was electric, crackling, as though the chandelier above might shatter at any second. A cousin laughed nervously, quickly silenced by Ramona's glare. One of the uncles muttered under his breath, but no one dared challenge me outright. I straightened my back, the paper bird in my pocket pressing against my side like a reminder. Fragile, yes, but still standing, just like me. "I may stand alone," I continued softly, "but at least I stand as myself." For the first time since stepping into this house, I felt my voice fill the room, not trembling, not pleading, but claiming space that had been denied to me. Ramona's eyes narrowed. She lifted her teacup with graceful calm, but the way her hand tightened on the handle betrayed her fury. She sipped slowly, then set it down with deliberate care. "You are bold, Lev," she murmured, her tone like silk wrapping a knife. "But boldness without wisdom is dangerous." I met her stare without flinching. So is silence. gasps rippled again, and in that charged moment I knew I had crossed a line. There was no going back. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid. The silence after my words was sharp enough to cut. I stood there, heart pounding, every breath heavy, while the family stared as though I had set fire to the tablecloth. And then, slowly, Braden lifted his head. His eyes met mine for the first time since last night. Not fleeting, not by accident. He looked straight at me and I saw it. The fracture. His mask slipped. For a heartbeat, the room fell away and it was just him and me. His face was pale, drawn tight, but in his eyes there was something raw. Regret, fear, love, maybe, buried under layers of silence but still there. He opened his mouth. The smallest sound escaped. It was barely more than a whisper, but it was enough. Ramona's gaze snapped to him like a whip. Her hand stilled on her teacup, her smile curdled into warning. Braden faltered, the word dying in his throat. His lips closed, his jaw clenched. But it was too late. I had seen it. Everyone else might think he remained silent, but I knew better. I had seen the war behind his eyes, the truth clawing at him from the inside. I wanted to scream at him, "Say it! Just once, say it! Choose me!" But I didn't. Not here, not with all of them watching. Instead, I held his gaze. And for a single fragile moment, it felt like we were both standing on the edge of the same cliff. He dropped his eyes again, retreating into silence. But his hands, pressed flat against the table, trembled. And that was enough to tell me. Braden wasn't whole. He was breaking too. The air around the table was heavy, trembling with unspoken things. My words still lingered like smoke, Braden's fractured whisper still echoing between us. Ramona placed her teacup back onto its saucer with deliberate grace. The porcelain clinked, sharp in the silence. Her eyes swept the table, commanding without effort, and then they landed on me. She smiled. Not the kind smile she offered to guests, nor the indulgent smile she gave her children. This one was thinner, sharper, a smile that could cut. "Well," she said softly, "it seems our Lev has finally found her voice." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter moved around the table, but no one dared carry it far. Ramona's tone wasn't for them. It was for me. She leaned back slightly, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. I admire spirit, truly I do. It is refreshing. But spirit, my dear, must be tempered. Otherwise, it burns too brightly and burns itself out. Her words floated, silk-wrapped steel, a warning dressed as wisdom. I kept my gaze steady, though my chest tightened. She was watching me closely, as though measuring how much weight I could bear before I snapped. Ramona tilted her head, her voice lowering so the whole table leaned in to catch it. "You remind me of myself once, young, bold, certain the world would bend before me." She paused. Her eyes glinted, hard and unyielding. And then the world taught me. It bends for no one. The silence that followed was suffocating. Every cousin, every uncle, every silent ally sat rigid, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. Braden stared at his plate, but his hand still trembled against the table. Ramona's smile widened just enough to look victorious. "So let this be my gift to you, Lev. A lesson. Family demands loyalty, and those who forget that—" Her gaze sharpened to a blade. "Rarely last long." My heart thudded painfully, but I refused to look away. I didn't answer her. Not this time. My silence wasn't submission. It was defiance, the kind that doesn't give the enemy another inch. Ramona sipped her tea once more, serene as if nothing had happened. But I saw it. The flicker in her eyes, the crack in her perfect composure. She knew I wasn't as easy to tame as she thought. And for the first time, I saw something else in her gaze. Not just disdain, not just control, but caution. The meal ended in silence. Knives scraped plates. Chairs shifted back, but no one dared speak too loudly. The air was heavy, as though the chandelier above might shatter if a single wrong word were uttered. I pushed back my chair slowly. The sound echoed across the marble floor, drawing every gaze. My legs trembled, but I stood tall, smoothing the fabric of my dress with steady hands. Ramona watched me with that same porcelain smile, her eyes sharp, unblinking. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Her silence was its own kind of challenge. I inclined my head politely the way one might to a queen, but I didn't bow. Then I turned and walked away. The hall stretched before me, long, gilded, endless. My footsteps rang against the polished floor, each one louder than the last, like a drumbeat announcing a departure that was more than just physical. In my hand, I carried the leather-bound notebook, its weight grounding me. In my pocket, the paper bird pressed against my palm, bent but still holding shape. As I walked, I felt the sting of tears gather, blurring the golden frames on the walls, the echoing chandeliers above. But I didn't let them fall. Not yet. At the end of the hall, a tall window poured in pale morning light. I stopped there, letting it bathe my face. The warmth was faint, but it was enough. For the first time since stepping into this house, I breathed deeply. Behind me were knives hidden in smiles. Ahead of me, uncertainty, struggle, perhaps even loss. But also freedom. Also the chance to choose. I whispered to myself so softly no one else could hear. They think they've broken me, but sometimes the cracks are where the light gets in. The tears finally slipped, tracing hot lines down my cheeks. I let them fall, and then, with the notebook clutched to my chest and the paper bird safe in my pocket, I stepped forward. Not broken, not silent, still mine. In the end, Lev walked away with nothing but a notebook and a fragile paper bird. Yet within her she carried something greater, the strength to remain herself. This story is not just about betrayal or silence, but about resilience, about finding light even in the darkest halls. We've all faced moments when loyalty was tested, when love felt like a chain, but like Lev, we can choose not to break. Remember, sometimes the cracks we fear the most are where the light finally enters.